Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 86 with Ed Boyer. Ed is a master at a cappella music. He produces, arranges, and mixes, some of the top a cappella stuff that comes out. And we really got into the details of how he does it, how he mixes a cappella music. And it was really cool for me and eye-opening. And I think any audio engineer would learn a ton from this information. And, we also talked about his journey, how he was recording his collegiate group, how he turned that into a side hustle, and then later his full-time thing. Talked about how he worked on shows like The Sing-Off, working with bands like Pentatonix, and so many other things. Really learned a ton from him, and I just enjoyed schmoozing with him. So I think you're going to like it too. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is my conversation with Ed Boyer. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Ed Boyer. Ed is a producer, arranger, recording, and mixing engineer for a cappella music, working with clients around the world, from high school and collegiate groups to television, film, and platinum-selling artists. Ed's work has been nominated for 6 Grammys and won 1. He's worked on the Pitch Perfect films, shows such as Glee and The Sing-Off, and with top a cappella groups such as Pentatonix. Ed has actually mixed for many of my friends who are in some a cappella groups such as 613 and the Maccabeats. And my friend Justin recommended I reach out to Ed, who graciously agreed to join me on the show. So welcome to Secret Sonics.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's a crazy time to be alive, but I hope you're doing well.
It is. All things considered, I can't complain. I've been continuing to work from home. And we're all here and we're all safe, so all things considered, it's pretty good.
Right, relative is the right word for how things are going, I guess. So you've clearly achieved major success in an extremely niche role, which I love. Let's go back to the beginning, though. How did music start for you, and I guess how did that lead into audio?
Sure. So my grandmother was an organist and a music teacher. My mom was an organist and a music teacher. My dad really liked music, but didn't really have any formal training. But we grew up in a house where music was always a thing. I had an older brother who's a better musician than I am to look up to. So there was always music happening. And it sort of became my way to meet people, to make friends, to be active. Eventually, it was sort of my ticket into college. I applied to a program between Tufts and NEC, where you go to one school, you go to both schools simultaneously to get degrees. And word on the street was that if the music conservatory really wanted you and you were borderline at the school, then that could get you in. And that's really what happened to me was I was a tenor who could read music. So they said, well, he's right on the edge. Can you take him? And they did. So that it was kind of my key to going places, to getting out of my hometown, to meeting people, to getting into college, you name it.
Wow.
So I got to college and I was doing the really serious conservatory thing. And I thought it would be nice to do some music as well that's not serious, that's just lighthearted and for fun. And like anybody in college, I was looking for a social group as well. So I saw an a cappella group and I thought, you know what, that looks fun. That looks challenging. Let's give it a shot. I auditioned and joined a group called the Beelzebubs at Tufts, and it was a really great experience. We traveled all over the United States. We traveled in Europe. We sang 50 to 100 shows a year, and it was self-run, so you had to learn how to run a group. You had to learn how to direct. You had to learn how to arrange. You had to learn how to acquire transportation and make sure everyone has passports. Like all these things about life we were learning, not in college, but in our silly little side a cappella group. So it really was.
I love that. It was the school of real life.
Yeah, it was kind of I was at conservatory learning all these theoretical things about music, but then my a cappella group was actually going out and performing for people and doing public concerts and things.
Yeah, I love that.
So, of course, one of the things we did was record, and we recorded first at a couple commercial studios, because this was right when Pro Tools was becoming accessible to people, And around the time we started, it was still the type of thing where you would go into a commercial studio and they would have 3 rooms and maybe one of them has Pro Tools. And like you pay extra and like you get the Pro Tools room or whatever. By the time I was out of college, it was just that span of time that like I had my own Pro Tools rig. So that was really, those few years in that time, it went from being barely on the scene to a college kid could have Pro Tools.
So crazy.
It was really kind of a crazy time, especially looking back on it. So we started going to studios, and by the time I graduated, we were just doing it ourselves. Had a rig. I basically convinced the group to buy me a rig, and I said, if you buy me a rig, I'll record the album. And that's how I got my first rig and my first like recording experience. Wow. So
what made you what led to that kind of like, proposal to the group?
I think one, it was interesting to me. I had tinkered with it, like, in high school we had a 4-track, like a cassette 4-track. So I tinkered with that, and I tinkered with, there was a program called SoundForge by Sony, and they had a looping program called Acid, and I had tinkered with that stuff, and we're faced with raising a giant pile of money to go back to the studio again, and we just sort of thought, well, why don't we try it a different way? Yeah, that's nice. How we ended up doing that.
Were you pleased with the results from those recordings?
Now I am. One of the things I've learned is that it's really hard to assess whether something is good or whether you like it when you've been immersed in it for days or weeks or months. You get so close to it. I don't think during that time I liked anything I did. But I can look back on things I did in that time and say, you know what? That was pretty good, especially considering that was like the first or second thing I ever did. The album was well received. The world of acapella has its own little little niche community, like you said, and they have awards for performances and recordings and things. And that album, it won every award it was eligible for.
Wow!
So,
oh my gosh, you hit like a grand slam out the gate.
Well,
basically.
And we had help. I wasn't mixing it. I was just recording it and producing it. And we hired Bill Hare, who's like a legendary a cappella engineer. So, it's not like I just plopped in and did one thing by myself first and it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, a little help from friends never hurts, right? Like especially at the beginning, you need to collaborate with other people who know better than you.
And he still masters maybe half the stuff I do, because I trust him and because I know he knows where I'm coming from and stuff like that.
Yeah. How did you hook up with him?
He mixed one of the albums we did when we were going to the commercial studios still.
Got it. Wait, so continue with your story. So you make this record. Oh. You record it. You decide. You know what? I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna buy me the Pro Tools rig, and I'm gonna record the group. And that record does really well. What happens next?
Yeah. So by does really well, we mean it was recognized. Like, it's obviously not making any money because there's no money to be made. In this world, if you make your money back, that's really good.
Yeah.
So we moved to New York, where my wife is from, and I started interning in the city. And I was interning during the week and during the weekends working on people's a cappella music, basically just to kind of pay for my life. It was the side hustle, and interning at the studio was the main thing, or so I thought. And eventually, the more I was looking ahead, the bleaker the internship looked, and the more promising the side hustle sort of became. And then eventually, maybe 2 or 3 years after we moved, it just sort of became obvious that it didn't make sense to do the internship anymore. It made sense to make the side hustle into a full-time thing. So I did that and really kind of never looked back.
Yeah, I love it. So I guess the market was telling you this is where you need to go. Like, people were happy working with you on the side, and just kind of forget this internship that's probably barely paying you kind of thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, it kind of happened on its own. People kept giving me money to do this one thing. And eventually it's like, well, I guess I'll keep doing this thing for money. And the internship was, I think it was $20 a day, and I needed at least $7 to get there and back on the subway. So by the time I got there and back and ate lunch, monetarily it was a wash.
Pretty rough. Yeah. Wow. Did you have an aha moment where you realized like this is really working? Like this is going to be a thing?
So Bill, who I mentioned, was kind of a mentor of mine, and I went to a couple albums later, same group. I went out to his house to sit in while he mixed. And being there, sort of sitting in his house and seeing how he just kind of had his whole life set up. Like he was there with his family, he was getting consistent work, and sort of comparing it to what I was doing, which was slogging in and being in a studio that, it had no windows, and it was a very high stress studio because they were doing commercial jingles. So it was all about, and adding.
Yeah.
It's like if you can imagine Mad Men, but set in the early 2000s and with music, it was like that. It was like a client, it was like an ad agency comes in and they want to hear 3 pitches for the commercial. And if they like one of them, then somebody's made $200,000 to live off of. And if they don't, they don't. So it was high stress all the time.
Oh my God. I just interviewed somebody who in India was telling me about these kind of studios that like do those commercials in India. It seems like so stressful. Also, like it's like even crazier there. Yeah. That sounds intense. Yeah. Anyway, so you went out to meet what's his name, Bill.
Yeah. So when I was there, I kind of thought, you know what, it sort of gave me the courage to do it. So I actually called the studio while I was out there and told them I wouldn't be coming in anymore. And then when I got home, I just started doing the thing full time. And I think there was also some psychological stigma of like, oh, I'm bailing out of the mainstream world or the commercial world to go do this weird music. You know what I mean? I think part of me felt like I was giving up on what at the time I considered to be legitimate. So there was hesitation there, and of course there was hesitation about like, is this something I can really do to pay for my life? Like, can it be a full-time job? And the irony, of course, is that I ended up working on some mainstream things because of it. And so far, I have been able to pay for my life. So
yeah. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's so niched out, but like, I'm not. Do you feel like that there's room for a lot of people to work in this niche, or do you feel like it's just like, I don't know, just like a very select few can actually make it in like the acapella world?
The market has grown a lot. So for one thing, I got in, like I was saying, I got in right when recording became way more affordable, like all at once. So I think before I got in, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for people to get in general. And then around that time, I think, there were a handful of us that all sort of jumped in around that time. And then what happened was with all of the internet was exploding. So there was a lot of people finding out about groups that were happening elsewhere and starting their own group, things like that. So the market was growing, and then once all the shows and movies came out, once Glee came out, and once Pitch Perfect happened, and once The Sing Off happened, the number of groups blew up like exponentially.
Yeah.
So the market just got huge, and the accessibility of recording equipment got way easier. So the market got big, and the number of people going into it got big. And I don't know which was growing at a faster pace, but certainly it's a much bigger tent now with a lot of people in it relative to what it was. Still compared to people who are trying to sell beats, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny number.
Right.
People who are trying to get commercial placements, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny number. But relative to what it was, it's bigger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you were hinting at it, but I think the work that you did with Pentatonix, I think, was probably like really what jump started your career and theirs as well. Am I correct?
Sort of. So what happened was in 2009, the show The Sing Off happened, and one of the music directors for that show was a guy named Deke Sharon, who's sort of like the most prominent person in the a cappella